Imagine a prince, willing to turn his back on an entire empire, willing to give up his royalty, his wealth, and his right to the throne. All for a simple shepherd boy. In an ancient world completely ruled by blood, power, and betrayal, what these two men had was supposed to be impossible. This is the untold story of David and Jonathan, the deepest, most powerful friendship the Bible has ever recorded. Before this moment, David was nobody, just a kid from the fields who brought bread to his brothers. But after David defeated Goliath, everything changed overnight. The giant was dead. The armies of Israel were celebrating. And suddenly, this young shepherd was thrust into the spotlight. The people loved him. The women sang his praises in the streets, chanting that David had slain his tens of thousands. And in the royal palace, a young prince named Jonathan watched it all unfold. Jonathan wasn't just anyone. He was King Saul's oldest son. He was a fierce warrior in his own right, a commander of armies, and the rightful heir to the throne of Israel. By all worldly standards, Jonathan should have seen David as a threat. He should have been threatened by this rising star who was stealing his spotlight. But true greatness recognizes greatness. Something powerful happened the moment Jonathan looked into David's eyes and heard him speak. It wasn't rivalry that sparked between them. It was something eternal. The Bible tells us that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Think about that phrasing, knit. Intertwined so deeply that separating them would tear the fabric of who they were. Jonathan loved David as his own soul. That very day, in the presence of God, Jonathan made a formal covenant with David. But it wasn't just a verbal promise. Jonathan did something that shocked the royal court. One by one, the prince began to strip away his identity. He took off his royal robe, the ultimate symbol of his status as the crown prince. He handed it to David. Then, he unbuckled his armor. He handed over his sword, his bow, and his belt. In the ancient world, giving someone your weapons and your clothes meant you were handing them your authority. Jonathan was effectively saying, "What is mine is now yours. I am stepping down so that you can step up." It was a staggering, powerful symbol. The Prince of Israel was willingly lowering himself to serve the one God had truly chosen to lead. Jonathan saw the anointing of God on David, and instead of fighting against God's will, he embraced it with open arms. But outside of their brotherhood, a storm was brewing. Not everyone was happy about David's sudden rise to fame. King Saul, Jonathan's father, watched David's success with a growing, toxic resentment. Saul became utterly tormented by jealousy. Every cheer from the crowd for David felt like a dagger to Saul's ego. As David's fame grew, Saul's inner rage burned hotter and hotter, twisting his mind until he could no longer see David as a servant, only as an enemy. The madness eventually broke. One afternoon, while David was quietly playing the harp to soothe the king's anxious mind, Saul snapped. He gripped his heavy iron spear, locked his eyes on the young man, and hurled it with lethal intent. David pinned to the wall. That's what Saul wanted. But David dodged it. Saul tried it again a second time. Yet every time, by the grace of God, David escaped the blade. Imagine the impossible position Jonathan was put in. His father, the king, was losing his mind, demanding the head of the man Jonathan loved like a brother. Jonathan was trapped between familial loyalty and divine truth. Yet through the madness, through the threats, and through the shadows of the palace, Jonathan stood firmly by his friend. He refused to let his father's darkness corrupt his own heart. The situation reached a breaking point. David went into hiding, knowing his life hung by a thread. In the shadows, Jonathan made a dangerous, treasonous promise to David. He would test his father's true intentions at the upcoming new moon feast and find a way to warn David if his life was in immediate danger. The feast arrived. David's seat at the king's table sat empty. When Saul noticed the empty chair, his suspicion turned to absolute fury. He demanded to know where David was. Jonathan stood up, bravely speaking up for his friend, trying to reason with his father's madness. But Saul's anger completely exploded. He looked at his own son and screamed insults at him, calling him the son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Saul yelled, "As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now bring him to me, for he must die." Jonathan looked his father in the eye and asked a single, definitive question. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? That was it. Saul lost all control. In a fit of blind rage, the king raised his spear and hurled it. Not at David this time, but at his own son. Jonathan dodged the spear, leaving the table in hot, righteous anger. In that terrifying moment, Jonathan realized the absolute truth. His father was totally determined to murder David, and time had officially run out. The next morning, Jonathan went out to a lonely, secluded field where David was hiding. He brought a young servant boy with him under the pretense of target practice, using a prearranged secret arrow signal to let David know that danger was imminent. Once the servant boy was sent back to the city, David emerged from the shadows. The two friends fell into each other's arms. They embraced tightly, the weight of their reality crashing down upon them. They wept openly together, knowing that their lives were spinning in completely opposite directions. David wept the longest, realizing he was now a homeless fugitive in the wilderness. Through his tears, Jonathan looked at his brother and said, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" It was their final, heartbreaking goodbye. David would flee into the cold, harsh wilderness to live in caves. Jonathan would return to the heavy, broken atmosphere of the palace. They would never live under the same roof again. But despite the distance, despite the tragic reality of their separation, their covenant remained completely unbroken. The story of David and Jonathan challenges everything our modern culture tells us about relationships. True friendship doesn't seek its own advantage. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't look at what it can get, but what it can give. It loves, it protects, and it willingly sacrifices. Jonathan had everything to lose: a crown, a kingdom, a legacy. Yet he willingly laid it all down because he valued truth, loyalty, and the call of God on his friend's life more than his own ambition. He showed us what it truly means to put someone else above yourself, even when it costs you absolutely everything. In a world full of fair-weather connections, this is the kind of profound, sacrificial friendship God calls us to build. The kind of loyalty that outlasts the storm. Which Bible friendship story should we tell next? Comment below.